Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the A Side. I'm your host, Riley, and today I am very excited to be talking about the newest Kid Cudi album, the third installment in the Man on the Moon trilogy, Man on the Moon 3, The Chosen. Now, Man on the Moon is a series of albums where Kid Cudi kind of tells the story of his life and the things that he's had to overcome and the problems and sadness that weigh on his heart. And he does this as a way to kind of reach out to people, mostly kids, who are going through similar problems um, and have anxieties and sadness and all these problems weighing on their hearts, keeping them up at night. It's Cudi's way of helping them. I heard one time that Cudi said he makes music to stop kids from killing themselves, and that's something Cudi does through these Man on the Moon albums by telling the story of his life because he hasn't had an easy life. And as a result, Kid Cudi becomes one of the most relatable and emotionally hard-hitting rappers out there. Now, I would say Man on the Moon 3 is the weakest of the trilogy, but that's not saying much considering the fact that Man on the Moon 1, The End of Day, is my favorite hip hop album not made by Kanye West. And despite its flaws, I think Man on the Moon 2, Mr. Rager, isn't really that far behind. So this album is, still really good, even though it's the weakest of the trilogy. So this album being 10 years in the making, there was a lot of hype for it, and I was really excited when it was announced, and I was excited to listen to it, and I do really like this album, and I'm glad to report this album is good. It's not flawless, it has its problems. I'm not going to sit here and act like Cudi just dropped his best album, because I don't think he's ever going to top the original Man on the Moon, but this album is pretty great, I'll be honest. It's only 58 minutes long and 18 tracks, which is pretty short compared to his last project, Passion, Pain, and Demon's Land, which was 90 minutes. And before that, we had Speedboat to Heaven, which was just as long, if not even a little longer. So it's nice that this album is a little shorter. Still an hour long, but shorter. Um, and of course, this album, hits hard in places. It's something that really relates a lot of the time, like Kid Cudi usually is. And musically, I think this album sounds really good sonically. It's different from the first two Men on the Moon, so don't expect the same thing. It's a lot less psychedelic. If anything, it's closer to the vibes and the kind of more atmospheric sound we got in Passion, Pain, and Demon's Land, which isn't a bad thing because I do really like that album, and I like the kind of more vibier, moodier sounds this album brings. It's very inspired by more modern trends in hip hop, such as trap and drill. You hear the trap beats a lot throughout the entirety of this album. Not a bad thing though, and I've been a pretty big kind of critic of the trap sound, but I think Cudi pulls it off really well here, mostly because um, Cudi has always been a very moody rapper, very kind of sad, and the trap sound has always been very moody. So I think Cudi works really well, kind of riding over a trap beat. And the thing is that sets him apart from a lot of the trap I don't like is that he is very emotional. He has a personality. He has like a soul. You can tell there's someone in there. And his lyrics are interesting, and he hits hard emotionally. And also, the production is just so good. The beats on this album just sound great. The album, very good job being produced. The entire thing sounds great, especially a lot of the synth tones. You can hear some really pretty synth tones on the end of the album and the final track. Like I said, it's not as psychedelic as the first two Men on the Moon albums, specifically the first one being very psychedelic, but it does have its moments of psychedelia, such as Dive, Mr. Solo Dolo Part 3, and the closing moment of the album. So yeah, overall, I do really enjoy this album. I love the vibes of it. I love how kind of atmospheric it is, but it still has a bit of that psychedelic edge. I love Cudi's songwriting. When I get into the track listing, I will point out a couple of the lyrics that kind of hit me hard. I like how emotional the album is. I like how good it sounds, how well it's produced. Like I said, the synthesizers and electronics and a lot of the keys on this album just sound really good. Everything is just produced very cleanly and it sounds great. I do have my problems with it though. A lot of the features are very weak, like Pop Smoke and Trippy Red, so I think this album is a lot better when you have Cudi at the helm of the songs, when he is kind of the um, main focus of his own story, and I find that to be the case with most of his albums, but at least features in like Men in the Moon 1, like Common and Kanye, or 2, when you have like CeeLo and people. Um, come out really well. Here, they just seem kind of annoying. And another thing is a lot of the tracks on this album, while I enjoy just about every track with one exception, I find it hard to pull my favorite tracks off of here because a lot of them kind of start to blend together throughout the entire album. It kind of becomes one sound, one song, one vibe that it's hard to pick songs out that you like. It's not like looking at Men in the Moon 1, oh, Pursuit of Happiness, Up, Up and Away, or Men in the Moon 2, Mr. Rager, Ghost, Scott Miscuddy versus the World. There aren't really too many of those moments on here. There are moments I think are highlights, like Tequila Shots, Mr. Solo Dolo, Part 3, For the Kids. They are here, but there are a lot less than on the other Cudi albums where I can go through and think of every song on like Man on the Moon 1 or 2 and tell you what they are and what they sound like. I don't think I could do that on Man on the Moon 3, and I don't think I'd be able to do that even when I let this album sit for a while. That doesn't mean it's bad, I just a little criticism of the album. But overall, I do really enjoy it. Whoa, costume change, dude! Anyway, now another problem with this album for me is a lot of like the hype vocals and stuff that are in the background. You're like the yeah, it's lit. Really annoys me. But beside that, I think Cudi sounds great on this album. He gives a great performance. His flows are really good and kind of that classic moody Cudi way. And of course, those ethereal hums are just an out of body experience. They take me to another plane as always, just jamming out to. Honestly, I could listen to that for hours on end, and it would probably be Cudi's best album. That man hums like a god. I think his singing voice actually has really improved too over the years. I think a good track to hear his improved singing voice is "Lovin' Me." I think he sounds really good in that track, and he's really come a long way. Because if you listen to like "Speeding Bullet to an Atrocity," he sounds terrible singing on this album, but he sounds pretty good here. Maybe because the production is a lot better than that album, and the production really does back him up here. But he does sound really good, and I want to give credit where credit is due. Cudi sounds great. And also, I think the time period should play a bit of an account into how I rate this album and how I look at it. And the thing is, I think now is the time we could all use a Man on the Moon album, like Man on the Moon 3, because 2020 has been one hell of a year. I know every YouTuber has gone through it talking about how shit 2020 was, but I think having a Man on the Moon album is a perfect time for it to drop. Um, because people can relate to it and it'll help people through these tough times because it's that kind of album. It's an album that, has impacted me while listening to it emotionally. It's something I can relate to in a lot of spots. Much like a lot of Cudi's work, it's something that's always helped me and helped so many people. It's just music you listen to and vibe to in the toughest of times and the best of times as well, because Cudi is just a very talented artist. Now, I want to get into the track listing because there's some really good tracks here. Like I mentioned, I had some trouble pulling out a lot of tracks, especially in that first half of the album. I feel like all the tracks, while being enjoyable, weren't really standouts in a way, things I would come back to on their own outside of the context of the album. But there are really good tracks here, and one track I didn't like that I do want to go over and talk about a little bit. The track opens with an interlude. The album opens with an interlude, sorry. But the opening track, the real opening track, is called Tequila Shots. And this is where we really see the kind of trap influence. And I think Cudi actually rides this trap beat really well, especially because this is a banger of a song. Like, the beat is fire. And Cudi just does a great job on top of it. It sounds really good. I vibe with it. I mess with it, man. And the lyrics here are great, especially the chorus. Can't stop this war in me. No way, can't stop this war in me. The song is kind of about your emotions pulling you every which way and being very divided about how you feel and being torn apart on the inside like there's a war going on. And that's just, Cudi being deep about stuff, like the line, standing on the cliff off of Mulholland Drive. Um, Kind of reminds me of Blur's Clover over Dover, talking about standing on the white cliffs, jumping, and it's all over. Kind of those vibes of really despondency and being on your last thread. Really, this song is just a banger, with the hums and the "Can't Stop This War in Me, Can't Stop This War in Me" over that fire beat. Cudi does a good job writing it. Overall, just a really great way to start out the album. It's followed up by "Another Day," which is a really dark sounding song. It's got this very rich, kind of deep, dark sound to it. I mean, once again, Cudi is kind of being depressing, like always, but in the best kind of way. And he talks about how he just lives from day to day. How if he makes it another day to see another sunrise, that's an achievement. That he's living life one day at a time, surviving. And the fact that he got up was good enough. And once again, it's something that can make you feel good, that you need to just live your days one at a time, and it will all work out just fine. And Cudi kind of brings that here once again over this really dark, rich sounding beat. Dive is a really pretty track, like I mentioned, one of the more psychedelic tracks from the album, followed up by Damaged, which is a really good song, a pretty good song, but it does sound very Travis Scotty. And I know Kid Cudi was a huge influence on Travis Scott, so of course they're going to sound similar. But I specifically mean in the second verse at one point, Kid Cudi sounds like Travis Scott. Like, it sounds like he is Travis Scott with all the kind of like reverb and vocal effects on his voice. He sounds almost like it's Travis rapping, and I don't really fuck with that. But besides that, this track is alright. Um, Heaven on Earth is another one of my favorite tracks on this album. It's got a very unique beat, and it's very interesting, especially when set to the rest of the album. It's very different. It sounds a little more organic in places with these, like, almost what sounds like a clock ticking, and then these like really kind of loud electronics kick in. It's just a very interesting beat, and it very much stands in contrast with what is heard before it, but it still feels cohesive. The top comment on the YouTube video of this is this that ice cold Sprite cranberry type beat, which I thought was pretty funny. Um, but yeah, overall a good song. I do really like the switch up in beat here. And it's followed up by the only track I don't like on this album, which is Show Out, which is a different direction than the rest of the album. When I mentioned earlier that it has a drill inspiration, this is what it is. This is very inspired by drill, and I do not like the drill beat. I think it gets pretty obnoxious. I don't think it's very interesting. And this also is very heavy on the features with Skepta and Pop Smoke. And no disrespect to either of them, RIP Pop Smoke, but I don't think they do a great job here. I'm not in. Pop Smoke is just yelling your usual trap buzzwords, and Skepta is fine, I guess, but this album's strength is when Cudi is telling his own story. This is very much Cudi's album, and I don't really care about anybody else on here, and Cudi doesn't even come in until the second verse, and he's not even on the chorus at all. So really, I'm not into this track. It doesn't work for me. It's not terrible, but it's definitely the worst song on the album, and not one I really want to come back to. I think in future listens I will skip it, to be honest. There are 17 other tracks for me to listen to, but it's okay because it's followed up by one of my favorite tracks on the album, Mr. Solo Dolo 3, which, is about kind of being enough for yourself through hard times. Um, and also about trying to get his way through mental health and alcohol addiction, and doing it by himself. He is Mr. Solo Dolo. There's nowhere else to turn, so he has to overcome these things by himself. Um, and the thing is, when compared to Mr. Solo Dolo Part 2, this is a lot better. Whereas Mr. Solo Dolo 1, the original from the first Man on the Moon, is an amazing song, an all-time classic, right? Mr. Solo Dolo 2 from Indicud is just kind of a shitty redux of that, kind of done again, the same thing with a Kendrick feature that's so out of place on Indicud, just thrown on there. Where this song is very different from the first Solo Dolo. It does its own thing. It's one of the more psychedelic tracks on the album, but it is very vibey and kind of heady. Um, and I like that, and it's a lot kind of that dark sound again. Um, but it sounds different from the first Solo Dolo, but it still kind of does justice to the original and still kind of has the same spirit the original does. So even though it's doing something different, it still fits with the original one and sets out to do what the first one did. And I think it's one of the best songs of the album for that. And it's followed by what's probably my second or third, probably tied with Mr. Soldier 03 for my second favorite song on this album, Sad People, which overall is just a really great song in most respects. Um, it's about all these sad and dark thoughts Cudi has, especially at night, that keep him up, and of course all the sadness weighing on his heart. There's one line in particular, which I think is probably one of the best lines Cudi wrote, and is definitely my favorite line on the entirety of this album, and that is, "This ain't living. I swim in pain, never drown, keep my head above the waves," which is just such a righteous and triumphant moment that if you ever felt sadness, you can relate to that and feel that you're never going to let it overtake you, no matter how bad it gets. This line really shows that you need to come together and you can get through it. And it's very empowering and encouraging to hear that, especially coming from Cudi, someone who has gone through a lot in his life. And it's just a great moment. And that stood out to me the first time I heard it. And that as a whole just brings this entire song together to be one of my favorites on the album. Elsie's Baby Boy flashback is about Cudi's childhood and the relationship he has with his mother, almost like Kanye West's Hey Mama. Not quite. It's got its own thing going on. It's a little different from the rest of the album. It's got like a more kind of upbeat vibe. A little more playful in places, even though it is still a pretty sad and dark song overall. It can get a little repetitive. He was so bored in the winter, so bored in the winter. He was so bored in the winter. Such a little sad boy, little sad boy, little sad boy. Elsa's baby boy. And then it goes back to the bored in the winter, little sad boy again. So it can be a little repetitive, but it is a very enjoyable song overall. I like the different vibe of it. I like how it's more kind of sentimental and talking about his mother and the relationship he had with her. Not one of the better tracks on the album, but still pretty solid, and I think noteworthy for its kind of difference in theme and its place in the concept of the album, which this is a concept album, of course, Man in the Moon 3. Talking about the Man in the Moon character, we mentioned that earlier, how he uses the story of his life to kind of reach out to other people to help them feel better, and he tells his story of overcoming and the sadness he feels to help other people fight similar feelings, and we get that again on The Void, which is probably my favorite track on the album, I would have to say. It's definitely up there. I love this song. It's just classic Kid Cudi the entire way through. He's rapping like classic Cudi. The beat sounds like classic Cudi. And it's talking about fighting depression and not letting it overtake you at any costs. He'll fall into the void just to avoid that sadness, the void being pretty much anything. And it's a song about standing up and fighting through depression and overcoming the darkness. That's like 5 minutes of just pure beauty lyrically and sonically. I love this song. Like I said, it's just absolute classic Kid Cudi, especially at the end when he's just kind of repeating, "It's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay, I promise you," and like hushed whispers. You really do feel like it is going to be okay. It's almost a song that's up there with like songs like Pursuit of Happiness or Mr. Rager or Man on the Moon. It's one of those songs that has a similar feeling where it just really hits you in the heart and like, you know what? It's gonna be okay. We're gonna make it through. Me and Cudi. And that's a very similar feeling to another one of my favorites, For the Kids, which is another top favorite of mine off this album, where Cudi talks to you, us, directly, the listener, telling you that, you have these problems, you're sad, you're depressed, you're anxious, but it does get better. You're going to get through it. And he talks to us directly, saying you're going to get through it and that you're not alone and you have places to turn and people to come to. And then Cudi thanks us directly for us fans and the people who supported him, helping him through his sad feelings and bad times and time in rehab and everything that went on in his life. This is him giving back to us, telling us it's going to be okay. Stars in the sky that will light your way through. Feeling alone, just know that you're not. We won't leave you. And it's just a beautiful song. And I think Cudi too. Just his flow sounds amazing over this track. Especially hooked up with once again one of those banger ass trap beats. And I think it just works really well throughout the entirety of the album. And as a penultimate track as well, kind of really wrapping things up emotionally. And it closes off with Lord I Know, which is again another pretty good track. I think it's a good closer. Especially the very end, where these beautiful electronics just swell to a crescendo in a more kind of psychedelic moment, almost kind of like a Pursuit of Happiness or something off of Man on the Moon 1. I'm losing my voice, and my water is up there. So yeah, a great closer, especially that little ending moment. And then you get a whisper, to be continued, meaning maybe Man on the Moon 4? We're only supposed to get 3. This is supposed to be the end of the trilogy, but who knows if Cudi says to be continued. It will to be continued. Um, so, yeah, I won't have time to talk about every track. I don't want this video to be super long. It's already almost like 20 minutes. So, yeah. Overall, I do really like this album. Like I said, I think it's the weakest of the Man on the Moon albums. I know this review is really out quick. The album came out today. But I listened to it like 5 or 6 times. I was really excited for it. I've listened to it quite a bit today. It's actually the first album I've ever downloaded on day one. Usually I buy on physical. This wasn't released on physical, and I was so excited for it. I fucking bought it and downloaded it. So be proud of me because I am stepping into the 21st century with the rest of you. Anyway, I'm feeling a 9 minus out of 10 on this. It's probably my favorite rap album I've heard this year, which says a lot because there are 2 other rap albums that were really good this year, which you will see. Good segue, Riley, into upcoming videos if you subscribe and stick around. If you're here because you're a rap fan, I do plan on covering Whole Lotta Red by Playboi Carti when that drops. As far as projects we know are coming, I am in the middle of production on ranking Oasis's albums, that great Britpop band everyone loves. And then closer to the end of the year, I am going to be doing my top 15 favorite albums of the year in a video. And spoiler alert, Man of the Moon 3 will be on there. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Subscribe, like, stick around, comment what you thought about this album. I guess maybe rank the Man on the Moon albums. Tell me which ones you want are the best, the worst, and why. Why not? Throw in why. Or just comment something. I like to read them. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope I didn't sound like too much of an asshole. I know this was fast. Ooh, my leg fell asleep. I know this was kind of a fast review, but I wanted to get it out because I was very excited about this album and had a lot to say. This is going to be my longest review in a while, actually. I've been trying to keep them down to about 15 minutes. This one's going to be about closer to 20. So maybe not the album. It's the album we needed, but maybe not the one. Wait, I don't know. I'm trying to reference The Dark Knight, but I'm tired. Anyway, thank you for watching. Kid Cudi, Man on the Moon 3, 9 minus out of 10. So next time.